the SCO Summit, and after that we had military parade in China. It was somehow huge. You look at the weapons, you look at the parade, it comparing to what we've seen in the United States. But here is the reaction coming from the Trump administration was somehow confusing. Donald Trump came out and said it's too late for India to come back to us. Then he said we've lost Russia and India to China, to deepest, darkest China. And here is, I think, you looking at Donald Trump. Here is what he said, Mark.
States, everything in the world would die. It's true. It's so powerful. It's so big, and I made it really big in the first 4 years. Then it started to degenerate with what this Biden administration.
Yeah, it's all the same story.
We
It's
would all
administration.
die without Trump in the United States. You know, that's
And he has somebody to put his blame.
and they stand around him
Yeah.
smiling as he says that, like what he's saying isn't the rantings of a madman, of a little literal emperor with no clothes. It's shocking. This Shanghai Cooperation Organization summit at the presidential level in China, in Tianjin, China, was definitely the most important geopolitical event of the week, and probably the most consequential such multilateral, multipolar aspirant summit in some time. So where the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, I mean, there's obviously some, shall we say, geopolitical overlap with BRICS, with BRICS Plus. But the Shanghai Cooperation Organization is first and foremost, it's Eurasia, right? Brazil is not a member. South Africa is not a member, right? It's focused on Eurasia, right? The founding members, Russia, China, and the Central Asian states, and then India and Pakistan have joined. Then they've got tiered membership with the dialogue partners and associate members and so forth. But there were 20 heads of state in China for this event. So another summit of the world without the West, right? Because it is an Asian century or a Eurasian century, that sort of thing. I mean, we've been told that repeatedly, right? The Western media over the last decade has done a really good job at ignoring every BRICS and SCO summit that have happened, right? You struggled to find any mention of them, even like they weren't worth commenting on. The U.S. wasn't there, so I mean, how important could it be? I mean, that was the mentality, but they couldn't ignore this one. This one, everyone was watching, right? Even Donald Trump, and it was two events rolled into one in a few days' time, because it was this SCO presidential summit in Tianjin in China, and then 2 days later was this in Beijing, was the 80th anniversary of the defeat of imperialist fascist Japan in World War II, and of course the celebration of China's outsized role and the cost that they paid into that, China being at war and having been invaded by Imperial Japan for years before anyone else joined that particular conflict, and China suffering some 30 million dead and atrocities committed by the Japanese on them that put even the Nazis' worst fantasies to shame. So very, very important day for them. So not only a display of China's military power as a deterrent on stage, which was important, but also, historical memory, which is increasingly, of course, being deliberately whitewashed from Western minds, as part of their propaganda narrative about the history of the world. At the SCO Summit, part of what draws so much attention to it this time, of course, is the fact that there is still a war going on between NATO, between the U.S. and the rest of NATO and the West, by the U.S.'s own admission, right, Marco Rubio, a proxy war against Russia in Ukraine. And there have been attempts and claims, so many claims in the Western media over the last 3 years of how Putin is isolated, right, from the world. Yet here was the world, and there was no end of leaders lining up. This was a summit of the world without the West. And who was isolated? Well, it seemed to me like it was the US and the Europeans that were isolated. They were the ones not there. And no one was much missing them, I have to say. So there was that. But there was also Modi. And as part of the Trump administration's attempt to force Russia to end the conflict in Ukraine on American terms, despite the fact that Russia is winning on the battlefield, they have turned to having failed to crush the Russian economy with sanctions. They now seek a war against the rest of the world, a sanctions tariff war, to force them to stop trading with Russia. And the two biggest purchasers of Russian energy are China and India, and then Turkey and the EU. But we can't really sanction our own allies, I guess, not with even more tariffs than we're already giving them. So they have to be ignored. And the U.S. can't punitively punish China, because very quietly the U.S. just lost the trade war that they started with China. And they can't reopen that can of worms, right? Over the issues of rare earths and certain magnets that China produces that the U.S. doesn't produce, not in the quality and quantity needed by the U.S. military, by the U.S. high-tech industry. And that was leverage that China had over the U.S. And so Trump gave up on his tariffs war against China. And so now he's mad at Putin, but Putin is the real Teflon Don, right? I mean, he can't do anything to him. So he can't punish China. So what does he do? He punches Modi, right? Because Modi, he was seen as the weakest link there. But Modi and India, a rising great power, certainly a regional power, the subcontinent. There's a reason they call it that. The most populous country in the world is simply not going to take that. They're not going to. The U.S. cannot dictate who they can and cannot trade with. They are a sovereign and independent power, right? They're not a European vassal state. They're not some Pacific island that exists on U.S. sufferance. They're India. They were doing diplomacy, back when the United States was, planes with the Native American teepees, cresting the plains grass. The India refused, and the U.S. put these punitive tariffs on India, and Trump has tried to call Modi 4 times at least in the past few weeks, at least according to reports in the Western media, and Modi's so furious that he refuses to pick up the phone. So that said, Modi goes to China despite geopolitical tensions between China and India, tensions that, it must be said, the U.S. did a great deal to deliberately provoke as part of their geopolitical strategy of turning India into the Ukraine for China, right? Turning them into proxies to be used to contain and almost certainly confront China. That's all been all the decades of ingratiating themselves to China, of luring India in that capacity, right? The whole creation of the word Indo-Pacific, right, to use in that context, has now been lost. And India had a wow, that's what you look like with the mask off moment with U.S. hegemony, and Modi went to China for the first time in 7 years. He didn't have to go. He could have sent a foreign minister. He went. And not only did he go, but then he very demonstratively took the hands, right? Walking hands held with Putin and Xi Jinping in China, and had this, really ice-breaking bilateral meetings as well with China, where Xi Jinping said, now is the time for the dragon to dance with the elephant, meaning that China and India need to recognize that there are bigger things at stake. They need to resolve their differences, let bygones be bygones, find common cause, and resist this, flailing, desperate U.S. hegemonic pressure, this desperate attempt to keep control of the world. And that is what the SCO Summit was on display there. It was defiance of the West, of the world without the West, in a way that, previous summits just haven't seen, because there's this new context, right? Trump himself tweeted about it, right? Quite bitterly, quite seething. He first he made a comment about a sarcastic comment about the military parade in China, and he ended it. I won't read the whole thing, but he ended it with this obvious sarcasm. May President Xi and the wonderful people of China have a great and lasting day of celebration. Please give my warmest regards to Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un as you conspire against the United States of America. Oh my God, the bitterness. He's sitting at home watching, and they're living rent-free in his head. That's just amazing. And then it went even further. And we had this social media post by Trump, where he posted a picture of Modi and Xi Jinping and Putin walking hand in hand together at the SCO Summit. And he said, looks like we've lost India and Russia to deepest, darkest China. May they have a long and prosperous future together. Again, the seething. First of their deepest, darkest China. What kind of racist, colonialist, heart of darkness nonsense is that? Are you conflating U.S. imperial beliefs about Africa and China? Deepest, darkest China. What even is that? I don't know. But I mean, you forced India and Russia, right, into alliance with China by your hegemonic hubris, right, and seeking to, against all realist international relations theory and strategy, rather than trying to divide and conquer or move against one, no, they tried to pressure and seek confrontation and conflict with all three at the same time. And yeah, this is the result. All right. And it didn't, Donald Trump has seen it come to fruition, and particularly under his lack of diplomacy with India. But this has been something that's been building for years. So it's nothing new. But I know that maybe the tariff sanctions on India were the straw that broke the camel's proverbial back in that regard. So this is the U.S. and Europe isolated. This is the world without them. And there were there was the symbolism, there was the show of unity and defiance, but there was actually some real concrete stuff, because I'm a realist, right? And yes, I'm all for the symbolism and the unity and the messaging, and that was all there. But where's the meat, right? I want to see geopolitical action out of these multilateral summits, if they're to be more than just photo and ops and talking shops, like ultimately Rio was, because nothing was really done in Rio. Maybe things were discussed, but there was nothing concrete coming out of that. This was different, because there was the announcement of a new SCO Development Bank, right, that will run parallel to the BRICS Development Bank, which is a big part again of this alternate global financial architecture that the multipolar world is building to just do business outside of the West, outside of the dollar, right? That's part of that. So that was a big announcement, right? Banks aren't sexy, they're not military gear on display, they're not conflicts, right? But the truth is that money makes the world go round. And in that sense, there's a reason why the U.S., the Europeans have the IMF and the World Bank, and the role it's played in their financial control of the world, for decades now. Well, now that we'll have the BRICS Development Bank and the SCO Development Bank as shall we say, parallel institutions to those Western ones. But I think probably the biggest concrete wasn't even necessarily an SCO achievement, but I mean, part of the SCO, of course. It was a bilateral deal between Russia and China. The announcement of a deal being struck on the creation, finally, after a decade of negotiating it, of Power of Siberia 2 gas pipeline, which is going to run from Western Siberia through Mongolia and into northeastern China. And the important thing about this, there's already the Power of Siberia 1, which draws, from the gas fields in southern, southeastern Siberia. But this new pipeline, which will add, to the amount of energy Russia is supplying to China, again, in defiance of the U.S. here, quite obviously, is coming from the Yamal gas fields in northwestern Siberia. And the importance there is these are the fields that gas was sent to Europe. In fact, in particular, they're the fields where Nord Stream 1 and 2 were to be sourced from. So this is Russia closing the door on Europe, saying, all right, we're done with you. We want a reliable consumer. We want someone who's not going to be trying to, pressure us and influence and overthrow our government and everything else while we're doing business with them, and who is a reliable partner. And this gas is now going to go to China, and that's huge. It's I've always said pipelines, whether we're talking oil, whether we're talking gas, these are geopolitics in solid form, right? These are the arteries pumping the blood through the development of a multipolar world here, tying the two countries together. And I mean, look, the U.S. went to the extent they did to finally sever the energy relationship between Russia and Europe, and to allow no going back, to blow up the Nord Stream pipelines, right? That shows you how important they are. And now China's economy is already more competitive than the Europeans, right? The Europeans facing rising energy costs are deindustrializing, right? You don't have to take my word for it. The Western mainstream media is full of articles about deindustrializing Germany and the UK and France in such financial situations that they may need an IMF bailout because they're bankrupt. And now, on top of that, even more of that cheap natural gas that would have gone to them is now going to go to China instead. Cheap, reliable supply, something that cannot be interdicted at sea in the Straits of Malacca by any US or allied naval action. And it's now going to China and will make China that much more, their goods, that much more economically competitive than the Europeans. This is not a nail in the coffin of the European economies, right? Because all the nails have already been put in that coffin, right? That coffin is already 6 feet in the ground. What is happening now is that Xi Jinping and Putin are standing on top of that grave, looking down at that coffin, kicking dirt onto it. That's what this is. This is crushing for Europe.